So welcome back guys, and in this video I'm going to look at life cycle hooks. So life cycle hooks are basically, if I've ever worked with something like WordPress, they're basically methods or function, whatever you might call them, which are executed at certain points in time during the life cycle of an object, of a component in the case of LiveWire, right? So, and they are fired out based on some specific actions that is happening on the component, all right? For example, if you update a property in LiveWire, a certain life cycle hook will be fired. All right. For example, if you render a component, a certain life cycle will be fired. So these are just basically methods or functions that are fired on specific time of the component or during the lifetime of a component based on some, some certain things which necessarily you don't need to know. Yeah, you just basically need to understand the order of the life cycle and when is it fired. Is it fired when I'm updating a property? Is it fired before the mount function? Is it fired after the rendered function? These are the most important thing for you to understand so that you basically know what time you need to use these methods. And so without further ado, let us dive in and see how to do this. So I'm going to my guy here, of course, is a to-do list. And what I'm going to do, let us just create a new component here, a PHP artisan, make livewire, and I'm going to call this component, let us say life cycle, like that. So this will create the component life cycle. And so inside this life cycle, I'm going to demonstrate all these life cycle hooks. Okay, it has created. So we have our life cycle method inside here. That is okay. So if I go inside our resource, inside our views, inside our LiveWire, inside of our LiveWire, we have life cycle. All right. So now when I go to the documentation, you can check out that life cycle hooks. We have a number of life cycle hooks. Here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 life cycle hooks. All right. And so you're told that LiveWire provides a variety of life cycle hooks that allow you to execute code at specific point during a component's life cycle. That is just basically the purpose of a life cycle hook, to execute code at a specific point, during the component life cycle, right? So they will enable you to perform some certain action before a certain event or after a certain event. So that is just basically the idea behind lifecycle hook. And to start with, of course, as you have seen all through, I've been using this mount method, all right? And mount method is basically like a constructor. When you have a class and you want to initialize that class, we use a constructor that is in normal PHP class. When it comes to LiveWire, we use the mount method, all right? So it is an equivalent of a constructor to a PHP class. But now we use mount because when you read the reason here, you're told that, however, in LiveWire, you use mount method for accepting parameters and initializing the state of your component. LiveWire components don't use the construct method, all right? Because LiveWire components are reconstructed on subsequent network requests. Yeah. So when you initialized your component for the first time, it will call the mount method. And again, when you fire up request, even though you are not necessarily reinitializing the component, LiveWire will reconstruct, or it will do some restructuring behind the scene, and you don't want to use the construct method, right? This is because it will reinitialize the component again. That is basically the reason why they use the mount method. I don't know how the mount method works behind the scene, but I just know it is used for initializing the component. So for example, now I'll go inside here, our guy. I'm going to say, actually, one thing that we need, of course, to do, we need to extends, and I believe this is welcome, so that it becomes a full page component, and the section is what content. That is okay for now, like this. Let me just confirm very fast from our guy. Okay, from our guy list task. Yeah, welcome and content. That is okay. And then, so now we can create a public mount here. Public function mount. And remember, you have to use the exact name that Livewire use, because you are basically overriding this method behind the scenes. So if you put something like, I don't know, whatever, it won't work. So here, let us say when I'm rendering a component, this is where I'll do the regionalization. For example, I have a property here. Let us say just for now, public. Let me just use the log. Don't have to use this guy here now. You can say log. I believe there is info. All right. Let me just import this and just say here, this is the mount method or lifecycle hook. Lifecycle hook, like that. That would be okay. And now I'll go inside the web.php here very fast. Let's see here. Here I'm going to call. Actually, let me just duplicate this very fast here. Call this live cycle, like this. And then I'll go here and call this live hyphen cycle. And of course, this will go to live cycle, like that. Okay, for now that is okay. So now if I just go to the browser, let me just go to my storage guy and check for the logs. All right, let me just close this one with this storage logs. I have a logs here. Let's try to run this fast. Go here, slash live cycle. As you can see down here, this is the mount life cycle hook. So that is the first guy that is run when you initialize a component. And when I go back here now, there are a couple of things that you can use to with the mount method, but I'm not going to do that now. The second thing that I want you to see is that we have this boot function. This boot function also is run when you initialize a component, and you're called at the beginning of every request, both initial and subsequent. So the only difference between the mount method and the boot method is that boot method is fired consequently, with the other request, unlike the mount method, which is fired upon the first request, upon the first initialization. So if I go back inside here, now let's duplicate this and call this, let's call this boot like this, and then say this is the boot life cycle hook. All right, so what I'm going to do, just to demonstrate what is happening here, I'm going inside the Livewire guy here, inside our lifecycle, and I'm going to use to add an input here. Very simple guy here. So just say input, all right, and then I'm going to wire model. Let us wire model a property. Let us say maybe name for now, and then in the life cycle, of course, we need to create this guy here. So I'm going to say public name like that. All right. So let us run this again and see what will happen here. So if I run this now, so we have our guy here, the input guy here. So I want you to see if I go back to the log here. So when I run this component the first time, you have the boot function. Actually, the boot function runs just before the mount life cycle hook. And now look at the magic. So now on the input, I've put this live to do a live update. So now look as I type here on this input here. So as I type something and then I go back to the Laravel logs, just check this out. As you can see now, the one which has been fired again, it is the boot function. All right. The mount function has only been fired once, while when I do the update here, the one that is fired again is only the boot function. As you can see again, the boot function. Again, if I go back and do something else again, go back here, the boot function is the only one which is being fired. And this is because, as I've told you, if you go to the documentation, the mount function is only fired at the first request. That is when your component is being initialized. But if you want to fire or if you want to perform some specific functionality on subsequent requests, that is before the component refresh or refreshing the page, then boot will be a good use case for that. If I go down here, let me just go down here and just take you through here. We have told that as therefore as mount is, it only runs once per component lifecycle, and you may want to run logic at the beginning of every single request. All right. So for example, if you are firing a request on key up or on key down, and you want to do some initialization, then you can do that inside the boot. Why? Because boot is fired on subsequent request apart from just the first request. So that is how you can be able to achieve that. So the next one is called the update, right? So the update method is used to update the live wire components at specific time. For example, when a component is being updated, then you can use updating. And once it has been updated, you can use the updated lifecycle hook. And here is an example. So here we are told we have a property here, and then you need to call, of course, this function here. So I'm going to call this function, and I'm going inside my guy lifecycle hooks here, and you can call this anyway, it doesn't matter. So let me just add it down here. It needs a property and a value. So the property, the name of the current property that is being updated, the value is the value about to be set to the property. All right. So for now here we can just use the property, and our property, of course, now is name. As you can see, is name. Then what we want, if anytime once a person types name on the input, just before this property has been set to this value, then throw an error. So you can do things like to check who is updating this value, if the value being entered is okay. Things like validation, authentication, all those things can be done in authorization. All right. So once I've done that, I want it to, we can say, let us say log. For now, I don't want to throw an an error here. I'll say log info, or let me just use the throw exception so that we can be able to see this live. Because if I use the log guy, you won't know if the updating is happening. So that is okay. So let's go here. Let's go here. I'll do a refresh here. So once I've done a refresh, let me just type the name here. And if I say name, yeah, as you can see, it has thrown an error here. Name, this will throw an error. Why? That is because while I'm doing the update, it will check behind the scene. And the good thing with this is that it hasn't updated this value, all right? So if I log the value here, you'll know that, for example, if I say the value here by default is, let us say test, all right? If I do this and then inside here, once I've logged the error, I can just, let me just log info, and I can just log I can just say this property, this name, like that. So let us do a refresh here again and see. So if I do a refresh here and I type something like a name, it will throw an error. And if I go to the logs, let's go to the logs. So as you can see, this has logged this, this test before throwing an error here. So as you can see, it hasn't updated. So you can use this updating to do verification or authorization or authentication just before a value has been updated. And then we have now the updated. So the updated now will let me say it will perform this action once the value has been updated. So now instead of updating, we can have this, and you can say if the property is name, then let me actually go back here and then just do a refresh here, go back to the documentation or scroll down. I'll just use this example. If the property is name, then I want you to set the name to string lowercase, all right? So let us do that here. And once I've set the name here, like this, and so the name, we can remove value, we don't need the value guy here. I'll log this name here, and then I'll just remove the exception guy like that. So for now, we don't of course need also this updating because it will throw an error and we don't want that. And then that is okay. So I'll go back here, I'll do a refresh. So I'm going to type, this is Kevin. As you can see, it is changing the value. As you can see, if I say, for example, my, it changes the words, right? So like that, if I say like that, you see, it updates the value like that. All right. And if I go to our guy, where is it? Laravel log. As you can see inside here, it changes the words into the small caps. And that is because if I say WA like that, changes the word like that, changes the words like that. I hope you have understood. So this updated, it updates the value or of your property once you have done whatever that you want. And so the next thing that I want you to look at or have a look at is what we call, let's go back here, and we have the guy updated property. So actually, as you can see, is that we can use this updated on specific property by tying the updated with the camel case for the property. All right. So we can say, for example, in our case here, we can say instead of updated, we can say updated name like this. And then of course we don't need the property here. This will basically do the same thing but specifically for the name. So now I don't need this property name here, don't need this, right? So while I'm updating this name, it will or once I've finished updating the name, it will perform the functionality that is inside this life cycle hook. So if I say, for example, let's say testing, something of that sort, you see it changes to small small letter, and I'm not doing anything, it's just doing it basically behind the scene. That will achieve the same result. And then for arrays, you can use updated, then the name of the property, and then you can pass the value and the key. So this will take the value for the array and also the key for the array. So that is it for that. And then now we have the hydrate and dehydrate. So you can just think of hydrate and dehydrate as guys which are used to serialize PHP objects to JSON and serialize back JSON objects into PHP objects. All right, and so and this is one thing that I did not understood while I was starting LiveWire, and that is because there was no clear instructions online. But once I read carefully the documentation, I was able to get it through. So the hydrate method fires from the second request onwards, right? The hydrate method fires from the second request onwards, which means on the first request it doesn't fire, and the one which fires on the first request is dehydrate just before the end of the request or the end of the life cycle of your component. The dehydrate method will fire, and then at the beginning of the second request, the hydrate method will fire, and then a couple of life cycle method that we have looked there, and then towards the end we have dehydrate, and then that cycle continues for the subsequent request. So let us try this and see. So I'm going to say, actually, let me just copy these guys here. So let me just, I want to show you that on the first request, the hydrate method does not fire. And that is because on the first request, you are not converting, you are not rendering your view or your blade file back to to PHP stuff, but rather you're just basically displaying that view. So the only thing that you need is the dehydrate, which will convert the PHP stuff into the view that the user wants. But on the second request, probably you have something on the view, you have something on the blade, and that is why the hydrate method has to fire. Hope that makes sense. That is how best I can explain that. So I'm going to push or to paste that here. So let me paste that guy here, and I'm going to say log info like this. I'm going to say this is hydrate method. I'm going to remove this. I'm going to copy this. I'm just lazy. I'm just going to paste this here. I'm going to say this is dehydrate like that. And then I'll save all now. I'll go back here. Now remember, this is the first request that you're going to run. I've deleted everything on the log. So it run like that, and then I'll go inside the logs, open the logs, and now as you can see, haha, here we go. Now here we have the boot, of course, which runs, then we have the mount, and then we have the dehydrate method. We don't have the hydrate method, but now if I type something here and fire a subsequent request, of course, I've typed something there, and now if I go back here, on the second request, now we have the boot life cycle, and then notice now we have the hydrate life cycle here, and then we have the dehydrate. All right, and this is for the update, so that is okay. And then we have the dehydrate. Yeah, so we have the boot. On the second request going onwards, we have the hydrate, then we have the updated, of course, and then we have the dehydrate. But on the first request, we do not have the hydrate, but starting from the second request onwards, we have the hydrate. All right. So if you want to have something again that specifically happens on the second request onwards, you can also use hydrate. And then if you want to use or to perform a specific function that happened towards the end of the life cycle of a component, you can use the hydrate, right? So hope you guys you have been able to understood or to understand that. Of course, we have render, we have rendering, which is basically the same as updating. So the render, of course, happens when you're rendering your component. So let's go back here, and by default you usually have this render method here. So I'm going just to do something before I return the view. I can just log also info here and see this is the render method, like that. Delete just this log. All right. And then I'll go back here. I'll do a refresh here. Actually, while I'm doing a refresh, let me just add also the rendering method here. So just say public function rendering. Just say log info. Say this this is render, misspelling rendering. Funny. This is rendering method, and then the last one is rendered, which occurs after the guy has been rendered. So let's say that. Say this is rendered method. I'm going to delete the Laravel log here, like that one. Go back here, I'll do a refresh. I'll go back here, I'll check the logs. Go down here, and now here we go. So we have the boot, we have the mount, and then we have the render. Actually, the render, guys, runs just before the dehydrate method, which means if you want to have anything that runs just after you have rendered your component, you can use dehydrate. So you have render, then rendering, then render method, which runs after the render, of course, and the rendering method, and then the dehydrate. And now again, if let's type something here like that one and go back here. And now if I open this, fired many requests, but anyway, you still understand. So we have the second time the request fired, we had boot, hydrated, updating, then we had the rendering, then rendered, then dehydrate, right? Then the third time, boot, hydrated, updating, rendering, rendered, dehydrate. So that is it. That is it for that. Let's see what I might have left out for you guys. So lastly, we have this tip here. We are told that you can use hooks inside a trade. So if I have a trade, For now, that is it, guys. Lastly, here we have using hook inside a thread. So I might just explain here a little bit, but I'm not going to show you necessarily how to do this because using hooks, or rather using trait, is not the intention of this lesson. So you are told, for example, you have a trait, let us, for example, as post form. Inside the trait, you can do something like mount has post form. That is the name of the trait. And then now inside the live wire component, you can just call, using this trait, you can just say this, I have this, I'm using this guy, this trait here, like this. Of course, this is going to throw an error because it doesn't exist. And then inside the trait now, I have something like, I can have something like this mount, all right? And so inside the trait somewhere, let us assume the trait is down here. So I can have something like this. So inside now my guy here, inside my component here, instead of doing mount again, I can just say, I can instead say, so I can just move this log like this, can move it inside here, the mount as function. I think if you use the trait here, you don't need to do this, if I'm not wrong, but I haven't tried that. Yeah, I don't think, that is just my assumption. I don't think you need to do this actually once you have use the trait with this. I'll do that on another lesson and then I'll let you know, guys, how this goes. I think if you use this inside the trait, then you don't need to, of course, to repeat this mount method inside this guy here. All right. So I believe you basically need to use this, but I'll do that and I'll let you guys know from other lesson. But with that, guys, this has been quite a long lesson. I hope now you have been able to understand how to use life cycle hooks in Livewire and how you can be able to execute code at different times or specific times in the component life cycle. And with that, guys, as usual, leave a like, leave a comment, and until we meet again, bye bye.